Greetings, fellow travelers of the lore-laden lands of Middle-earth. Today, we embark on a journey to uncover the enigmatic figure of Sauron during the First Age, an exploration into his origins, ambitions, and the intricate threads of his early corruption. While Sauron is often recognized as the Dark Lord of the Second and Third Ages, it is in the First Age that the seeds of his dark legacy were planted, nurtured, under the malevolent gaze of Morgoth himself. To understand Sauron in the First Age, we must trace his beginnings. Born as Mairon, which means admirable in Quenya, he was one of the Maiar, spirits of divine origin, created by Eru Ilúvatar before the music of the Ainur. Mairon served Auli the Smith, the Valar known for his craftsmanship and deep understanding of the material world. From Auli, Mairon inherited his immense skill in forging and his affinity for order and structure. But therein lay the seed of his downfall. Even in his service to Auli, Mairon craved mastery over the world, desiring dominion that blurred the line between order and tyranny. When Morgoth, then Melkor, turned to darkness, his rebellion echoed across the Ainulindale, the great music of creation. Morgoth saw in Mairon a spirit whose talents could bolster his own ambitions. It is here that the transformation began. Tolkien writes in the Silmarillion that Mairon was seduced not merely by Morgoth's power, but by the promises of efficiency, strength, and control, a perversion of the very virtues he valued. This sheds light on a critical aspect of Sauron's character. He was not drawn to evil for chaos, but for a twisted vision of order. Mairon's betrayal was not instantaneous. One wonders if there was hesitation, a moment when he weighed the cost of joining Morgoth. Yet, his lust for power proved insurmountable, and, around the year 1000 of the Years of the Trees, long before the rising of the sun, Mairon became Sauron, the Abhorred. Unlike other servants of Morgoth, such as Balrog, Sauron retained a measure of autonomy, acting as Morgoth's lieutenant and a chief strategist. This autonomy hints at a layered relationship between the two, one of loyalty but also ambition on Sauron's part to surpass his master. Sauron's role in Morgoth's schemes was subtle, yet devastating. While Morgoth wrought destruction with brute force, Sauron excelled in manipulation and deception. In the First Age, Sauron's skills were wielded to devastating effect in the Siege of Angband and the subsequent wars against the Noldor. His ability to inspire fear, not only through violence, but through psychological mastery, reveals an intellect deeply intertwined with malice. But how did Sauron perceive Morgoth? Was it admiration or opportunistic allegiance? Tolkien hints that Sauron may have believed Morgoth's dominion would be eternal, thus aligning himself with the winning side. However, this decision would later haunt him, as the defeat of Morgoth at the end of the First Age left Sauron vulnerable. What might this vulnerability say about Sauron's fear of failure, or his perception of mortality? The first threads of Sauron's personal tragedy are spun here. He is a being who seeks to impose his vision upon the world, yet he is forever overshadowed, first by Morgoth and later by his own legacy of defeat. As we dive deeper into Sauron's First Age endeavors, we uncover a master of shadows and guile, whose actions, though often overshadowed by Morgoth's own deeds, had profound and far-reaching consequences. His tenure as the Dark Lord of Tol and Gauhoth, the Isle of Werewolves, exemplifies his role as a manipulator and a craftsman of terror. Following the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, circa 455 of the First Age, Sauron's influence expanded significantly. Morgoth entrusted him with key fortresses, most notably Minas Tirith, not to be confused with the later Gondorian city, but rather the tower that Finrod Felagund, a mighty elf lord, had built on the island of Tol Sirion to guard the Vale of Sirion. Sauron captured this stronghold through sorcery and terror, transforming it into Tol Gorhoth, a fortress of werewolves. This was not merely an act of conquest, it was a statement. The corruption of Tol Sirion into Tol Gorhoth represents more than a simple shift in ownership. It signifies the profound difference between the world that the Eldar sought to preserve and the one Morgoth and Sauron sought to impose. Where Finrod had once filled the tower with music, light, and vigilance, Sauron infused it with dread and despair, populating it with creatures bred from Morgoth's malice. The werewolves he commanded were not mere beasts, they were spiritual abominations, inhabited by the dark wills of corrupted Maiar. It is here that Sauron's role as a necromancer emerges, a trait that would echo through the ages. He was a master of binding spirits to physical forms, twisting life and death to serve his ends. This skill extended beyond his dominion over werewolves. Consider his confrontation with Finrod Felagund during the quest through the Silmaril, when Beren and Finrod sought to pass through Tol Gorhoth in disguise. Sauron saw through their ruse. The subsequent battle of songs between Finrod and Sauron is one of the most haunting moments in Tolkien's legendarium. Here, we see Sauron as more than a mere servant of Morgoth. He is a sorcerer of unparalleled skill. The duel is not fought with swords or spears, but with words, will, and the power of song. Tolkien describes how Sauron's incantations filled with malice and deceit, filled with malice and deceit, filled with malice and pure music. It is a stark reminder of Sauron's ability to corrupt even the most sacred aspects of creation, language and music themselves. This moment also foreshadows his later manipulation of languages, such as his crafting of the Black Speech and his perversion of the Elvish tongues. The capture and imprisonment of Beren and his companions on Tol Gorhoth reveals another layer of Sauron's methods. Unlike Morgoth, who often acted with sheer destructiveness, Sauron used psychological torment as a weapon. He imprisoned his captives, feeding on their despair, while taking sadistic pleasure in hunting them down one by one with his werewolves. But why did Sauron choose such methods? Could it be that, in his heart, he feared the open defiance of heroes like Beren and Finrod? Sauron's reliance on deceit and terror, rather than direct confrontation, suggests an understanding of his own limitations. Despite his immense power, he preferred to break his enemy's spirits, rather than risk losing a battle of strength. Yet Sauron's dominion over Tol Gorhoth would not last forever. Luthien, the daughter of Thingol and Melion, together with Huan, the great hound of Valinor, stormed the island to rescue Beren. In the ensuing confrontation, Sauron faced utter humiliation. Luthien's power, derived from her divine heritage, overwhelmed Sauron's magic, forcing him to flee in the form of a bat. This defeat is not just a tactical loss, but a deeply symbolic one. It reveals that, even at the height of his power in the First Age, Sauron could be undone by courage and love, a theme that recurs throughout Middle-earth's history. What might this humiliation have done to Sauron's psyche? Defeated by an elf maiden and her hound, Sauron must have realized that raw power was insufficient. His later strategies, emphasizing manipulation over confrontation, may have stemmed from this very lesson. As we continue our journey through Sauron's exploits in the First Age, it becomes clear that his influence, though often indirect, shaped many of the catastrophic events of this era. While Morgoth cast a shadow over Middle-earth through open war and destruction, Sauron's subtle machinations contributed to the unraveling of some of the most significant strongholds of the Eldar. After his defeat at Tol Gorhoth, Sauron vanished from the forefront of the war between Morgoth and the Free Peoples. However, this withdrawal was not inactivity, but recalibration. Sauron's strength lay in his ability to strategize, adapt, and infiltrate. In the latter years of the First Age, his focus shifted toward destabilizing alliances and sowing discord. And while he operated in the shadow of Morgoth's power, his actions revealed a distinct cunning. One of the most intriguing aspects of Sauron's work in this period is his potential connection to the downfall of Doriath. While Sauron is not explicitly named as a direct actor in this tragedy, the circumstances bear the hallmarks of his methodology. Doriath, the fabled kingdom of Thingol and Melion, was protected by the girdle of Melion, a magical barrier woven by the Maya queen herself. This enchantment rendered the kingdom impervious to intrusion, save for those permitted entry by its rulers. However, as the tale unfolds, greed and mistrust creep into Doriath, culminating in Thingol's death and the sack of his halls by the dwarves of Nogrod. It is tempting to consider whether Sauron, master of manipulation, had some hand in influencing the chain of events. He had long observed the inherent weaknesses of the children of Iluvatar: greed, pride, and jealousy, and his later actions in corrupting Numenor suggest that he understood how to exploit these flaws. While not explicitly documented, the chaos that unfolded in Doriath aligns eerily with his style: indirect, insidious, and devastating. The lust for the Silmarils, which had already led to numerous calamities, continued to escalate during this period. Sauron, serving Morgoth, would have recognized their power, not only as jewels of surpassing beauty, but as tools of domination. Morgoth's possession of the Silmarils was both a triumph and a curse, as they ignited the relentless pursuit of vengeance by the Noldor. Sauron no doubt watched and learned from the way these gems corrupted even the noblest hearts, a lesson he later applied in the creation of the One Ring. Could Sauron have anticipated that the Silmarils would continue to wreak havoc even after Morgoth's defeat? It seems likely. His later actions in the Second Age, crafting rings of power to ensnare the wills of men, elves, and dwarves, mirror the destructive allure of the Silmarils. In both cases, objects of immense power are wielded to dominate others, their beauty masking their peril. As the First Age drew to a close, the tide turned against Morgoth. The War of Wrath, beginning in 545 FA, was waged by the host of Valinor, led by Onwe, herald of Manwë. Sauron's role during this climactic conflict is enigmatic. While Morgoth's forces were annihilated and Angband was reduced to ruin, Sauron avoided capture. In a remarkable act of self-preservation, Sauron abandoned his master, presenting himself to Onwe in feigning repentance. But why would Sauron, a servant of treachery, attempt such a bold deception? The answer lies in his understanding of power dynamics. Sauron recognized that Morgoth's defeat was inevitable, and sought to secure his own survival. Yet, when summoned to Aman for judgment, Sauron fled, retreating into Middle-earth to bide his time. This act reveals his most enduring trait, an unyielding will to dominate, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Here lies the irony of Sauron's First Age journey. While he was a lieutenant to the greatest Dark Lord of Arda, his survival and continued rise as a threat suggest he was, in some ways, more adaptable than Morgoth. Unlike his master, who sought total destruction, Sauron valued control, structure, and the perpetuation of his influence. This distinction would shape the Second Age, as Sauron emerged from the ruins of Morgoth's defeat, ready to carve his own path to supremacy. As the War of Wrath ended in 587 of the First Age with the defeat of Morgoth, the foundations of Sauron's future legacy were laid. This is the moment that begins to define Sauron as a being distinct from his master. Morgoth, cast into the void, was a figure of overwhelming brute force, consuming everything he touched. Sauron, by contrast, was the subtle manipulator who learned from Morgoth's failures. His survival at the end of the First Age was not merely a stroke of luck, but the culmination of his cunning and adaptability. In feigning repentance to Eonwe, Sauron's actions echo a recurring theme in Tolkien's works: the capacity for redemption, weighed against the pride that resists it. For a fleeting moment, Sauron stood at a crossroads. Had he truly humbled himself, he might have found forgiveness in the eyes of the Valar, as even Melkor had once been pardoned. But humility was beyond him. The thought of submitting to the Valar and facing judgment in Aman was intolerable, for it would mean relinquishing his will to dominate. This choice not only condemned Sauron, but also revealed a critical truth about his character. His evil was rooted in his refusal to relinquish control, a refusal to subordinate himself to a greater order. Sauron's escape marked the beginning of his long sojourn in Middle-earth, where he would shape the Second and Third Ages. Yet, his actions in the First Age left an indelible mark. Consider the fate of Beleriand, much of which was sunk beneath the sea as a result of the cataclysmic War of Wrath. While Morgoth bore the brunt of responsibility for this destruction, Sauron's contributions to the wars and devastation of the First Age cannot be overlooked. His mastery of strategy, deception, and psychological warfare amplified Morgoth's power, ensuring that no corner of Beleriand was untouched by their malice. What lessons did Sauron carry forward from this time? Perhaps the most significant was the understanding that direct domination, Morgoth's approach, was ultimately unsustainable. Morgoth's defeat stemmed from his unrelenting desire to wield power without restraint, drawing the full might of the Valar upon him. Sauron, by contrast, realized that a more subtle approach could achieve lasting results. In the Second Age, this manifested in his creation of the Rings of Power, which allowed him to dominate, indirectly, through the corruption of others' wills. But there is another layer to consider: the philosophical underpinnings of Sauron's transformation. During his time as Mairon, he was drawn to Aule's love of crafting and order. While this inclination became twisted under Morgoth's influence, it never entirely disappeared. Sauron remained, at his core, a craftsman, a creator who sought to impose his vision upon the world. This is evident in his later works, from the construction of the One Ring. Yet, these creations were always tainted by his insatiable lust for control. In reflecting on Sauron's First Age, one might also see a tragic irony. His fall, like Morgoth's, was a perversion of noble intentions. His desire for order and beauty, which could have been a force for good, became a source of oppression and ruin. Even his choice of dominion over Tol Sirion, a place once filled with light and music, underscores this dichotomy. Sauron could not create beauty in its purest form. He could only corrupt what others had built. Finally, Sauron's journey through the First Age raises an intriguing question. To what extent did he truly serve Morgoth? While he undoubtedly feared and revered his master, there is evidence to suggest that Sauron's allegiance was pragmatic rather than wholehearted. His survival after Morgoth's fall hints at an inherent opportunism. Finally, Sauron chose flight and self-preservation. This capacity to adapt and evolve, to shift his strategies as needed, set him apart from Morgoth's other servants and ensured his lasting influence across the ages. As we close this chapter on Sauron in the First Age, we are left with the portrait of a character both fearsome and tragic. A being of extraordinary skill and intelligence, corrupted by his inability to surrender control. His legacy in this era, though often overshadowed by Morgoth, is no less significant. For it is here that Sauron learned the lessons that would define his rise as the Dark Lord in his own right.